But we have a great talk coming up next. This is Nic Laughter, and he's going to talk about the hidden potential of people with ASD.
Thank you. So the hidden potential of people with Autism Spectrum disorder, or ASD. I decided to caption this more than meets the eye because I think that in today's culture, in the tech climate, a lot of people have quite a few misconceptions about what autism is, what it looks like, how it impacts our teams and personal relationships. And there is a lot going on below the surface. So my hope today is to kind of unpack that, and together hopefully we'll walk away with just a renewed understanding of what this actually looks like. Just as, if you will permit me, by show of hands, how many of you in here know somebody or are yourselves on the autism spectrum? So basically everybody, 75, 80% or so. It's everywhere. And if you don't think you know somebody that's on the spectrum, chances are you actually do. You probably just don't know that they are. So I wanted to kind of start with a short video that was produced in the 90s depicting what autism looks like.
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live, and guess what? I live there too. I hover around all of you. I know no color barrier, no religion, no morality, no currency. I speak your language fluently, and with every voice I take away, I acquire yet another language. I work very quickly. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands, and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain. I don't sleep, so I make sure you don't either. I will make it virtually impossible for your family to easily attend a temple, a birthday party, a public park, without a struggle, without embarrassment, without pain. You have no cure for me. Your scientists don't have the resources, and I relish their desperation. Your neighbors are happier to pretend that I don't exist, of course, until it's their child. I am autism. I have no interest in right or wrong. I derive great pleasure out of your loneliness. I will fight to take away your hope. I will plot to rob you of your children and your dreams. I will make sure that every day you wake up, you will cry, wondering who will take care of my child after I die. And the truth is, I am still winning, and you are scared, and you should be. I am autism. You ignored me. That was a mistake.
Right? It's crazy. This video was produced, surprisingly, by the organization Autism Speaks. Incredibly unfortunate. This was not only horribly misinformed, misguided production. Most of what's said in there is entirely inaccurate. But one of the largest organizations that speaks for people with autism produced this, and it made its rounds, and it was a horrible thing. The unfortunate nature of this, undercut only slightly by their reusing of a scene from The Room. Apparently not a lot of you have seen that horrible movie. Really speaks to the lack of information that's available. Autism is everywhere. I'm sorry. Let's take a second and just kind of go over a 30,000 foot view of what this is, what it is in our culture, where it is, and then we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper. So let's start with a basic understanding. Autism is defined as a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. The problem with this definition, this is a fairly standard working definition. The problem with it is that it actually does not communicate at all what autism is. It's just telling you what autism may look like. Of course, the problem with that is that most people in this room may do some of these things. Most engineers may have challenges with social skills. Some of us may have repetitive behaviors. And so it's important, and the reason why I wanted to take the time to give this presentation is because I think it's important for us in the tech industry to have a deeper understanding of what it actually is, what it looks like. The term neuroatypical is commonly used to refer to autism. Neuro, of course, being of the brain, and atypical just being not typical, not average. So this term used to kind of indicate that it's not the same thinking process, it's not the same things that happen inside an autistic person's head. It is estimated that 1 in 59 children in the US today are on the autism spectrum. So it's like I was asking earlier, how many of you actually know or yourselves are on the spectrum? Statistically, if you know 60 people, you know somebody that is on the spectrum. It may be just they haven't told you, or maybe you work with somebody or a family member, but you probably do. It is literally everywhere. And I keep using the word spectrum, meaning that it is actually a spectrum. Each person that has ASD has a distinct set of strengths and challenges. It is incredibly diverse. My hope is to give you a general understanding and to speak to the majority of what autism looks like, but do understand that the things that I'm talking about may not apply to everyone on the spectrum. Most of you here probably are familiar with this icon, the puzzle piece, actually usually tied with the color blue. This is generally synonymous with autism almost worldwide. If you see a puzzle piece, you'll see it on tattoos or people's banners on Facebook or something. Almost exclusively, it's indicating autism. And this dates all the way back to 1963, when Gerald Gasson, who was a father of an autistic child and a board member of the National Autistic Society, coined it a puzzling disorder. So I want you to think about that for just a second. It's something that is difficult to understand. For somebody that is not on the spectrum, it's literally impossible to comprehend what life is like. So when I was doing research for this presentation and I saw that generally autism is viewed as just a simple explanation of how autistic people are different than everybody else, I felt like it had to be a lot more than that. It's puzzling because autistic people don't just act differently. Autistic people literally see the entire world differently. So let's take a second to just dive a little bit deeper into what this is. So as I said, more than just acting or thinking differently, people on the autism spectrum literally have a different perception of reality. Most people tend to think of this as just seeing the world with a different color lenses or different type of perspective. But literally it is actually a different type of sight. So the best metaphor that I could come up with was if you compare night vision to heat infrared. These are images, right and left, are the same thing. The reality is the same. The world is the same. But what you see on one side is so drastically different from what you see on the other side. It's not necessarily that either one is better or worse. They're just different. But I think that this goes a long way to communicating that it's not simply you see one thing this way and I see one thing this way. Depending on the context, we could both be seeing completely different things, even though we're looking at the same subject or matter or whatever. This is important to understand why autistic people are so much different and why the strengths that exist are there. In the workplace, autistic people are becoming more and more prevalent. The problem is that most people don't understand how an autistic person perceives and understands reality. So when you walk in, assuming I'm speaking to a neurotypical person, you walk into an office, you just see people maybe sitting around or in a meeting, talking to each other, communicating. And an autistic person, for lack of a better way of visualizing this, they see pieces of what's been put together from their experiences in the past. They are taking things that they have experienced before and connecting them with, this person said this thing, this reminds me of something else that I heard that connected with a different situation. And so a lot of the times, opinions can be based not necessarily on personal thought in that moment, but more just based on how things have been connected in the past. This is a person named Cody Lee, recently made the rounds around Facebook on America's Got Talent. And of course, if you know anything about America's Got Talent, the only reason anyone hears about him is because he just blew the judges away and they were just amazed by him. He's blind and pretty severely autistic, and he got up on stage, had a hard time talking, and obviously his mom was there to help him, lead him around. He sat down on the piano and just this amazing, incredible musician and singer. I mean, just like bring tears to your eyes type of performer. And I thought that was an interesting example to bring up, if only just for the sake of expressing that autism is a disability, and is perceived as a disability because things that most people expect an autistic person, or any person to be able to do, autistic people tend to struggle with. But that doesn't mean that autistic people don't have an immense amount to contribute in any given category. So, all of that being said, I appreciate you sitting through my kind of long-winded introduction. Thank you for being here. It's incredibly important for the tech industry to recognize, I'm pretty sure basically everyone in this room would agree that diversity in tech is basically the answer to all of our problems right now. But neurodiversity is no exception to that rule. So, with all of that being said, hello, I'm Nic Laughter, and I am actually autistic. I was diagnosed as an adult, but my family has known my entire life that I was not like all the other kids. My diagnosis was referred to as severely autistic with high adaptability, which means just like any other severely autistic person that you may know, I have the same tendencies, the same repetitive behaviors. I just generally have the ability to, seeing how other people interact, to funnel them into a different energy or a different way to kind of exist in the real world. What's interesting about this is that I was dreading having this talk for the longest time, because when I share this, people are going to look at me differently after having realized this. And they shouldn't. I'm still the same person. I'm a husband, I'm a father. I feel like I'm a pretty decent conversationalist. I like to think I have a sense of humor, which would be incredibly unfortunate with my last name if I didn't. And I take pride in the fact that I can contribute to society. But people are going to, maybe not in general, but some people will see me differently or as just a different person with that, as opposed to just maybe recognizing like, oh yeah, he does say some weird things sometimes, okay, that makes sense, and then moving on. The reality is that people on the autism spectrum, we are different, but that's a good thing. And my hope in this is to give you an understanding of why that is and how we can capitalize on that. So we're going to discuss working with autism, working with people on the spectrum, and we're going to start by talking about the strengths. There are, like I said, a diverse amount of strengths that people on the spectrum do have to provide to any given environment. And so my hope is to be able to express what a majority of those might be, and to have abstracted them enough to apply generally to basically everybody with ASD. We're going to discuss roadblocks that currently exist in the tech industry, some things that make it difficult for people on the spectrum to get into a working environment. And we're going to go over what, in my estimation, will need to happen to pave the way for neurodiversity in the tech industry. So we're going to start with the strengths. And yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of time to brag, because I think I'm pretty awesome. And hopefully you will too by the end of this. Autistic strengths tend to be incredibly intense. I'll go into that in a moment. But the first one I wanted to talk about is that on the spectrum, we tend to be crusaders for justice. Autistic people have usually an overwhelming sense of right and wrong. It was one of the things that kind of struck me with the video that I showed earlier, is that this voice of autism says, I have no sense of right and wrong. And it's all baloney. Every autistic person that I've ever met, if they think something is right, every hill is a hill to die on. And they will argue until they're blue in the face that, no, this is justice, this is what needs to happen. Usually comes with, if you've heard the term making a mountain out of a molehill, that sometimes can happen. But I think this is a strength because, in my mind, if I have the choice between having somebody that I know is going to stand up for what they believe is right, no matter what, and somebody that I don't really know where they're going to stand, to me, I think that is a strength. Not exactly what we want in every situation, because again, we want diversity, but it is something that can be capitalized on for a business and even in personal relationships. We generally come with brutal honesty. If we say that we liked your presentation or we like your shirt or your hair, we mean it. And you will also hear if we don't. We generally just feel like, if you've read the book Radical Candor, when that came out, I thought, what's the big deal? That's just how I am. It wasn't until after I read it that I realized that's not how everyone else is. Like, people sometimes like to have things sugar-coated, and we're not good at that. We are good at telling you exactly what we perceive the truth to be and pulling no punches. Additionally, we are usually overwhelmingly sincere. This is kind of an extension of my last point, but a lot of people tend to perceive things that I do or things that somebody else on the spectrum may do and tend to assume a motive behind it. I tend to pride myself on being helpful. I like to see people succeed, and I like to give where I can. And I just like to do that because I like to see people around me being happy and doing well. And often, it's not uncommon for people to assume that it's because I just want to, get ahead, or I just want to, get on someone's good side. And there's not really any kind of undercover type of motive behind things. And a lot of that comes with my next point, is that we usually have an uncanny objectivity. We almost exclusively have no hidden agendas. When we say we want to do something, it's because we think it's a good thing to do. It's not because it's going to personally benefit us. Our thinking process, again, in line with just how we perceive the world to be different than most people, we start with what's good for the company or the team or like my very existence. And so because of that, we don't really stop to think, how can I benefit or how can I get ahead? The basis of our thinking is what's good, what's best, what's going to benefit. And this happens because we're at a tech conference. We generally build our reasons by filtering out whatever is of personal interest. Generally speaking, we can recognize if I am asking for something because it's something I want, or if I'm asking for something because I legitimately think that it's best. Sometimes we will try to play on that. If I really want a thing, I'm going to go for it. But I usually won't take the time to put it into a presentation on why this is best for everybody so that I can win. And at the end of the day, we almost exclusively have a desire to get to the bottom of things. Often, it'll happen that a company will have a problem. Something will happen, and invariably, in my experience, I've noticed that companies jump to sort of saving face. How can we spin this? How can we play this so that we come out on top, that we look good? And a lot of times this comes out in an abuse of people. It happens all the time. I'm sure it happens every day in maybe America, maybe around the world. Companies look out for their best interests, and it happens all of the time. Autistic people, like I said, we don't think along those lines. We want to find out why something happened. Even if it makes us look horrible, we want to figure it out. We want to uncover it and get to the bottom of it. And so I felt like this was one of the bigger strengths, because when you get a person on the spectrum in your company, or if you're friends or whatever, you can trust that they're going to tell you the brutal truth, and it's not going to be something that's going to benefit them personally. It's going to be something that they generally actually believe is how things really are. An additional strength is we usually have this extreme focus. It's usually because we tend to have an obsession with things being complete, with finishing things. If I start a project, I stay up at night if I'm not able to actually get it done. If I'm close, and I see a couple of you smiling, because I know that this is generally with software engineering as a whole. I know that this isn't a lot of an ASD thing, but it's not surprising that engineering as an industry draws, I would say, probably the greatest number of talent from ASD, because this is something that is very common with us. We just want to see things get done, even if it sucks and it's garbage. The fact that we want to be able to say, like, it's done, I finished it, like it's actually ready to go, is an incredibly strong point of pride for us. We tend to have incredibly deep passions and intense interests. I was talking to my friend Donnie earlier and explaining how generally with people, I'm sure that you can make yourselves do things. College works for a lot of people, because even if you can't stand math, or if you can't stand history or whatever, you can pull yourself out of bed and do your homework and drag yourself through it, and your motivation may kind of go up and down depending on whatever subject it is, but generally your motivation, your willpower will kind of get you through it. With someone on the autism spectrum, it's just not like that. Our motivation and generally our ability to get things done, if it's something we're not interested in, it's basically zero. I mean, we can force ourselves to do things, but we're going to hate it and complain, and you're going to know about it because, again, we're brutally honest. But if it's something that we are interested in and something that we're actually passionate about, it's 100%. And it's going to be like that almost all the time. It may change depending on what actual thing we're working on, but this deep passion, this intense interest, means that whatever thing we care about it more than anyone you will ever meet in your entire life. And generally, we know more about it than anyone you'll ever meet in your entire life. One show that I recommend for this is on Netflix. It's called Atypical. And they do a fantastic job of kind of demonstrating what this actually looks like. The main character is obsessed with penguins. And it's just a weird, random thing, but I love it because it's totally the type of thing that an autistic person would be like, yes, this is the thing I care about, penguins. Like, don't ask me why, it's just the way it is. But they do a great job. He knows everything about penguins. He's just always spouting random information and facts about penguins that no one cares about, but he loves it because it's just his thing. And because of that, we're usually fairly detail-oriented. We know if it's something we care about and it's something we're educated about, we will know if something is off. Nothing's going to get past us. If it's something we don't care about, trust someone else with it. Because, trust someone else. But if it's something we do care about, you can know it's going to be in the best hands possible. And because of that, we usually also come with a generally great memory. I can recall meetings that I have had that had nothing to do with me, that I can remember what time of day it was, what people were wearing, where I was sitting. That doesn't help me. It's just taking up space in my brain as I remember every detail, but it just doesn't matter. But if it had something to do with something that I cared about or something that I was remotely interested in, it's just concrete in there. And this happens a lot. We also tend to come with an almost robotic efficiency. Because of the way that our thinking works, we are usually just kind of on and off. I mean, again, I know this is generally similar with software engineering, but it's usually a hallmark of the autistic brain that we get onto something and we are on until it's done, or until something prevents us from finishing it. I know in my life, in my work career, there have been 12, 14, 16-hour days where I sit down in the morning, I'm trying to figure something out, and I'll go all day. I won't eat. I'll have a water bottle maybe with me, and unless something interrupts me, I will finish it. Or I'll just get exhausted because I've been sitting for 12 hours and I need to go do something else. It's common. If it's something that we care about, it's something that we're going to devote an immense amount of time to do. We tend to think in terms of a let's go, as opposed to what's stopping us. Most people, most neurotypical people, when you're going to start something, you usually take the time to figure out, like, well, okay, how much time is it going to take? How much effort is it going to take? What resources do I need? An autistic person will be like, okay, so we've made the decision to do this, I'm going. And it usually have to kind of rein people back in. I think this is an incredible strength, because the ability to trust people to say, this is something that we have, you go ahead and just take it and run with it, you will get such high return on the investment of having that person there. It's unbelievable. We tend to jump in feet first. Like I said, when something's been decided, when something's been already planned out, we're gonna just fly straight for it. There's almost zero consideration for repercussions, and it's worked out for me, not so much for other people, but I think that this is one of the key elements of what separates people with ASD aside from your general neurotypical people. Because simply just an ability to say, I don't even think about what's going to hold us back, I just want to jump straight in. It's just more common. And one of the last strengths is, it is neurodiverse. There is the reality that, you get an autistic person on your team, it's diversity hire. We can call it what it is. Realistically, obviously, that's not the end goal, but it is an aspect to take to your HR department when you're telling them to hire me, or one of my friends. All jokes aside, a different perspective of the world necessarily equates to a different perspective of problems. And what that translates to is that by having a diverse team, including a neurodiverse team, you'll be able to come up with unique solutions to problems that matter. And all of the things that I've said, all this time I've taken to brag, this is where the rubber meets the road. Because you, in your company, your team, even if you aren't over a person on the spectrum, if you just work alongside them, you personally stand to benefit by bringing in a neurodiverse team. So that wraps up, again, in general strengths. Like I said, it is a spectrum. There is a diverse number that I haven't covered, and not everything that I said applies to everybody. But it is generally what you can expect. We tend to be crusaders for justice. We will stand up for what we believe is right, and we will openly denounce what we believe is wrong. We usually come with an uncanny objectivity where we will tell you the truth no matter who it hurts or who it offends. We will come with an extreme focus where we want things to just be done, and we're going to sometimes not eat or rest until it is. We'll come with a robotic efficiency where we jump in immediately and we don't want to hesitate, and we will help you achieve a neurodiverse team. Next, I wanted to go over some roadblocks that currently exist in the industry. They are there. One of the most exciting things about being at DubDub is that there is such a focus on diversity. I don't know if any of you were at Mayuko's presentation earlier. She did a fantastic job about opening the door to the next generation, paving the way for the next generation to come in. And we do this by making it easier for different people to get into technology. But first we need to recognize what problems exist and openly acknowledge that they are there. So the first and biggest one that I have noticed applies to basically everybody on the spectrum is the dreaded open workspace. Again, if you'll permit me, raise of hands, how many of you work in an open workspace environment? I'm so sorry, I do too. Almost everybody does. It's cheaper for the company. You know, it comes with this assumption that it'll increase collaboration. It'll make it easier for people to get up and have these water cooler conversations and have the next billion-dollar idea that'll. It doesn't happen. We all know it doesn't happen. But tell your CEO that. The reality is that though conceptually open workspaces are fantastic, and in other departments they're fantastic. I mean, our marketing department, part of the reasons they're so effective is because of this kind of open environment. But it doesn't work for everybody. And on a team of particularly engineering that wants to attract a neurodiverse talent pool, it is rife with problems. The first being simple distractions. Because people on the spectrum see the world differently, this comes with crazy amounts of things I don't have the time to get into, but needless to say, if somebody on the opposite end of our department stands up, my mind immediately says, I need to stop what I'm doing and get to a stopping place because I know they're going to come over and talk to me, and then they're going to derail me for another half an hour, and then I'm going to have to handle something for them, and so I'm going to go over there, and then it spirals. It's horrible. If you're not on the spectrum, this sucks. For people that are on the spectrum, it's just basically impossible. Fortunately, at Jane, we actually have these booths in our kitchen. They're like restaurant booths, and I can go in. One of them has a pillar right next to it, so I can just sit down. I can bring a whiteboard over to the other side, and I can block out the whole office, put my headphones on, and it's great. It's a problem, and it is everywhere. This comes also with a risk of sensory overload. Many people on the spectrum have heightened sensitivity to a number of different inputs. Sound, lighting, touch, smells, whatever. If you have a scent, people on the spectrum are going to be incredibly sensitive to certain things. And so this is a problem because if you have an open environment, so of those of you that work in an open environment, how many of you have somebody that works next to you with a mechanical keyboard? Again, almost everybody. They're so loud. And for someone on the spectrum, this can be an absolute detriment to any amount of productivity in the department. One of my friends that I work with, he can't deal with it. And he shouldn't have to. And ultimately what that comes to is a lack of security. No one wants to feel unsafe in their workplace. Many people do. And so obviously, this needs to come with an empathetic approach that if you feel safe in your workspace, that doesn't necessarily mean that other people don't. And for someone on the spectrum, we need somewhere that we can feel secure, that we can feel like I don't have to worry about what's going to happen. I don't have to worry about, if I have a hearing sensitivity, I don't want to have to worry about being berated all day by the sound of someone else's keyboard. If I have a seeing sensitivity, I don't want to have to worry about feeling like I'm being punched in the head constantly because of a flickering fluorescent bulb or something like that. It's a huge problem. It's something that most offices don't tend to think about. I'll get into how we can solve these things in a moment, but I did want to take a quick minute to talk about what issues actually exist first. Next one is unpredictability. People on the autism spectrum generally cannot stand not knowing what's going to happen. Usually, we equate unfamiliarity with hostile territory. If we're not aware of what's going to come next, if we don't know what something is going to look like or be like or what's going to happen, it's just a horrifying experience. For me, this came about with roller coasters. Like I said, growing up, my parents knew I was a little different, but they never took me to get checked out or diagnosed. So when we would go to theme parks, they would drag me onto roller coasters, much to my chagrin. And I couldn't stand it. I hated them. I would always kick and scream. And they just thought I was just being dramatic. And they'd drag me on. And the whole time on the roller coaster, it was just terrifying for me. And we would get off. And I would say, that was great, let's go back. Because then I knew what to expect. I knew what it was going to be like. I knew, it wasn't that I was afraid that the carts were just going to go flying off the tracks. I just didn't know what was going to happen. And then once I knew I had experienced it, I was like, yeah, I kind of hate you guys for making me go on there, but the damage is done. I guess let's have fun. But the problem is that this comes out in day-to-day life. There's so much unpredictability in most environments. Some people, I've heard, engineers in some companies don't even have assigned seating or they don't have a dedicated desk. They get in and they're like, oh, where am I going to sit today? It may be fun for some people, but it is typically hell for an autistic person. And then, of course, the biggest roadblock is going to be communication. Because we see the world differently, the way that we convey our thoughts and the way that we interpret thoughts from others is radically, drastically different. And this comes out in no more an obvious place than text versus verbal. Generally speaking, when you are speaking to an autistic person, they are usually taking your words, and that's it. So if you imagine, if you're having a conversation one-on-one, and there's just a wall, and as you're speaking, there's an iPad on the other side where it's dictating your words and just printing it out in front. I want you to have that image in mind. That's not necessarily what it is, and like I said, this may not apply to most people on the spectrum, but I want you to have that in mind of that is often what we take from conversations. Growing up, it was always difficult to go to high school or dating because I would take things that people said for what they said. Sarcasm was almost always way over my head, and it was difficult because people just assume you're typical. They assume that you're going to know how to interpret those things. Which leads me to emails. What are they good? No one's seeing it? Okay. Apparently they're good for nothing because I don't know how many times I've sent emails throughout my whole life, and I get back like an okay, or usually not even a response at all. And I get it. It makes sense. Most people, even neurotypical or otherwise, if you see a block of text in an email, I bet if I were to ask to raise hands of how many of you would actually read it, you'd be lying if you did. We don't like to spend a lot of time breaking apart large walls of text from people. However, that being said, for someone on the spectrum, it is an incredibly important tool. It gives us the opportunity to formulate our thoughts in a way that we generally can't do on the spot, and think over it and process and think through what variables does this come with, how might this be perceived. And in our experience, knowing the people that we know, it gives us an opportunity to take information that we will not be great at conveying in person by speaking, and put it into a format that we feel confident accurately conveys what we're saying. The problem with that is that as autistic people generally don't receive social cues, facial microexpressions, things like that, neurotypical people also tend to read into text things that aren't there. There's many times where I've sent an email and I was in trouble because people thought I was being sarcastic in an email, which, yeah, we can all agree is probably a ridiculous thing. But it happens because it is a form of communication that allows us to do something that neurotypical people just expect to be there. And ultimately, this comes down to trust, just an ability to trust. Because people that are on the spectrum don't tend to think in terms of how it can benefit, we don't come with hidden agendas, we do things that we believe are actually good. And the issue with that is that we don't stop to think, what if this person doesn't already trust me? Or what if they have a reason not to trust me? Most people here, I'm sure, have had an experience where you've been let down by people in the past, and it happens. The problem is that for a neurotypical person, we look at this, it's funny, maybe a little humorous, because we've all had somebody that's burned us, right? The issue is that a neurotypical person typically isn't going to allow that to hinder their approach to communicating with people. And so, usually speaking, a person on the spectrum is just going to assume that there is reciprocal trust there. And so that's another issue. Next to that, a lot of times this comes with misaligned priorities, things that maybe were supposed to have been communicated or maybe hinted at that just kind of got missed. And then ultimately, this results in a feeling of kind of working amongst telepaths. Autistic people, if you were to ask any of them, if you were to ask about working environment, relationships, going to high school, anything like that, one of the most common threads is just that there was just stuff missing. So I want you to envision, I have to try to speed up because we have 5 minutes left. Try to envision you're an astronaut, you're going through space and you crash land on a planet. And you get out and it's amazing. There's aliens there, but they all look just like regular people, just like you and me, and there's buildings and cars, and it's just like Earth. But you're crash landed there, and there's no way to get home, and so you try to integrate into society. And as you're doing this, you start to realize that even though somehow they speak English or whatever language you speak, and you're able to just kind of integrate, there's something missing. You're realizing that you miss things, you don't pick up on certain things, and people kind of have a weird way to react to you. And it comes about that you realize that these aliens have this incredible ability to convey emotion telepathically to each other. But you can't pick up on it, and they can't pick up on you because you don't really know how to. And so you start to kind of learn how you can use some of the same techniques to maybe try to throw something, but at the end of the day, you just don't have the ability to communicate in the same way that they do. If you can get into this frame of mind, you can begin to get an idea of what it's like to be on the spectrum and work with other people that aren't. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to this famous quote that is usually attributed to Einstein, but I think there's no evidence he ever actually said it, that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. We are all different. That is the point of diversity. We all come with different strengths. So neurodiversity is just another aspect of that. It's not a disability that everyone needs to accommodate. It's different strengths and weaknesses that hopefully your company can make room for. I'm gonna have to fly through this to get to my end. Sorry I've been so long-winded, but thank you for staying here. So that does wrap up our roadblocks. Open workspace is horrible. Unpredictability is a pain. Communication is lacking. And expectations usually are unmatched. This leads to usually a feeling of something this GIF only really can embody. It's rough. So let's talk about what we can do to fix it, how we can pave the way to neurodiversity. So first, let's go ahead and address the workspace. I know most of you probably don't have the ability to make decisions like this in your company. I hope you are welcome to either share the video that will be recorded or just simply have these conversations with the people that make these decisions in your company, and hopefully it will lead to a better tomorrow. If at all possible, offer people a closed or quiet place to do their work. It doesn't necessarily need to be their own office, but just somewhere they can go that is their place. It could be a broom closet. That'll work. Ideally, to have lighting control. And it needs to be somewhere where no distractions are allowed. When I'm working, I have my headphones on, I expect if I'm going to get tapped on the shoulder, the first words out of your mouth are, "The building is burning down, we need to leave." If it's not that, leave me alone. Next is a schedule. We need a routine with minimal changes. We need to be able to know what to expect. We know what our days are going to look like. Ideally, cut meetings. I know this is a radical idea, but over my professional career, I've probably spent hundreds of hours or more in meetings that had nothing to do with me, or just didn't benefit me to be there or benefit the company to have me there. If you find yourself asking the question, does this person need to be here? You should probably follow that up with, do we even need this meeting? If the answer is no, I would encourage you to let yourself cancel it. Lastly is the environment. If you have an autistic person on your team, for the love of God, do not put them on the spot. We need time to be able to think things over. We can't just come up with good decisions on the spot. It just doesn't usually work out for us. And lastly, just trust us. Like I said, we come with this package of dependability and honesty and candor. Let us tell you if something's missing and trust us that it's not just because I want a weekend off. It's because I actually need time to put myself together because I'm going to freak out. We're not going to take advantage of you, and if we do, we're going to feel bad, and then we'll come clean anyway, because that's just how we work. And then lastly, this is a pretty controversial point, but if at all possible, become distributed or remote friendly. And this is huge, not just for people on the spectrum, this is huge for everyone. There's, first, no evidence that co-located teams are objectively better. There is evidence that co-located teams perform decently well together, but the trade-off is that if you're able to hire the best person for any position, you'll be able to hire anywhere in the world, and your total output will be better. It is, of course, better for the environment. And imagine how much carbon output we have just from commuting alone. And like I said, you'll be able to attract talent, neuroatypical and otherwise, which ultimately leads to, again, this diversity that we all care about and we all recognize we desperately need. And it gives us the ability to be equal contributors, not simply background characters on your team. I can't tell you how many companies I've worked for where I just deal with it because the only other alternative is to be jobless. And I've dealt with it and I've gotten through, but that sucks. I mean, we don't want to have to tell people this is the way things are so you can just live with it. So all of this ultimately comes down to a paradigm shift, something that I believe we need to do to open the door for everybody, regardless of how they are different. So again, it's going to take place in the workspace. It needs to affect our schedule. It's going to imagine the environment, how we handle things differently, and just trust us, and if at all possible, be distributed or remote. It's not going to be cheap or easy. Diversity will cost your company money, and it will be difficult. But the hope is that at the end of the day, we can take this puzzling disorder and maybe change the perspective to something more like a diamond in the rough. Something that's worth your time. So that you can take the good with the different. Because when you lead with empathy, everybody wins. Thank you all so much for being here. I apologize that we've gone over. Thank you.